Hi everyone, let's talk a little bit about our topic today of communications. And this lecture is going to be divided into two sections. We'll talk about the first 3 points, three major points in the first section. We'll talk about the last three major points in the second section. You'll probably see the background of my video change here because I'm losing some light here. Probably get the first part of this, the first three now, and have to change and do the second three a little bit later. With regard to our communications lecture, let me tell you what the 6 major points are. We're going to be taking a look at the purposes or goals of communication. We'll be talking about the types of communication. How can you communicate? The various general types of communication. We're going to talk about the 5 C's of communication. Those will be our 3 topics for the first part of this video. And then in the second part of the video, we'll take a look at some other topics, the next 3. We'll take a look at some keys to success, some useful tools that you might want to be able to use in your communications. We'll talk about presentations, some things that you might be able to do to make your presentations just a little bit better. And then we're going to conclude with a topic I call Other. We're just going to talk about some minor ways of communication that are very impactful because you're going to run into it a lot. We're going to be talking about how to leave a message on an answer machine or voicemail, which sounds like it should be pretty simple, but it isn't as simple as you might think. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about email. When you send an email, some things that might help you out. So let's get started with regard to the first of these topics, major topics, the purposes of communication. If you think about it, when you communicate with somebody, there's probably a million reasons, a million purposes that people have in communicating, and probably a whole lot of goals as well that they might have. But the textbook says, and I think it's right, I think the authors are right, that there are 3 major goals. And you can have a communication that has 1 or 2 or all 3 of these goals with regard to what you're trying to get done. The first goal is to inform. You want to inform somebody, hey, this car that I'm selling has these various features, etc., that you have. You want to give them some information. Another type of communication is another purpose of communication is to persuade. You want to try and persuade them, hey, buy this. Not only does it have these features, but look at all these benefits. It's really going to be a great thing for you, etc. And you're going to try to persuade them to make the purchase. And then the last purpose of communication is you're going to try to build goodwill between you and your customer, you and whoever you're communicating with. Try to build some goodwill. You're probably going to have a relationship, hopefully have a relationship over a period of time, or particularly if it's in business, you're probably going to be dealing with each other for some time. So you want to be able to build goodwill. So what are the 3 purposes, or at least the 3 general purposes? To inform, to persuade, and to build goodwill. Let's take a look at the second major topic then for today, and that's types of communication. Again, there are a million ways to communicate. You have social media, you can yell at somebody across the room, etc. You can send a text, you can send a letter, you can make a phone call, all sorts of different things. But in general, there are really only 3 ways to communicate. The first type of communication is called written communication. Written communication. Whether you write it on a sheet of paper, whether you write it on something electronically with regard to a computer or phone message that you're sending somebody, typing out a text or an email or something. It could also be something I'm writing on the board for in a classroom or something like that. Written communication. And the second type of communication is spoken communication. This could be verbal. It's also known as oral communication. All 3 of those can be used interchangeably. Basically, you're saying something to somebody and they're listening to you. Might be they're listening through Zoom internet and you're talking to them live. It might be on a phone. It might be somebody in a classroom, etc. You're talking to face to face. You have spoken communication. The third type of communication I want to get to in just a moment because it's probably the most important type, or at least the most impactful type of communication, and one that is oftentimes forgotten about, not thought about. With regard to written communication, and in fact all 3 of these, you should probably take a look at the notes that I have on Canvas and take a look at your textbook. to get an idea of what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons of each of these. For example, in written communication, one of the pros is, well, if it's in writing and someone gives me something in writing, I can always go back to it and see it. Whereas if they say it, it might go one ear and out the other. I might forget. And you have, the he said, she said type of thing. Or in communication, I have something to go back to. So that's certainly a pro. And with regard to cons, well, a con of written communication is oftentimes I write the communication and I send it, and I don't get to adjust it. It's not like halfway through the writing, as you're reading through it, I start to see that you like this or don't like that. I start to see how you're reacting to it. Well, I can't change the written communication. It's not like halfway through there, as I start to see this, all of a sudden I can go back and rewrite the second half of this or something like that. So one of the problems you have with written communication is it's not as flexible. It's not easy to make adjustments. You have to send a new writing, and that might take some time. Let's take a look at some of the pros and some of the cons of verbal communication. One of the nice things about verbal communication is not only do I hear your words, but I get to hear the tone of your speech. I get to perhaps see how you're talking, etc. But just from the tone, I get to see something. Have you ever, for example, received an email and you thought somebody was mad and they were just joking? You didn't know. You can't see the tone. You can't hear the tone in an email. But if I'm doing verbal communication, you can pick up the tone, and it might help you to decipher what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, what I'm feeling as I'm saying it, etc., what it really means. Of course, a con then to the verbal communication, to the oral communication, to speaking, is oftentimes when you write something, you have a little time to think about it right before you send it off, and you don't have to hit transmit right away. For example, on an email, you can actually think about it. But in verbal communication, you transmit, and it's gone. You're thinking here, and it's right out there. Oftentimes, we don't think too much before we say something, and of course, you've probably been in that position where you've said something, and I thought, "Geez, why did I say that?" And had you thought about it, you either wouldn't have said it another time, said it another way. But that's the problem with oral communication. There's not a whole lot of time to think about it. It's more spontaneous, which might be a pro, but it also might be a con. So one of the things you want to do is you want to take a look at the pros and cons of both written communication and the verbal or spoken communication. The same for this third type as well, but the third type is one that people often don't pay much attention to, but it might be the most important, or at least the most impactful, and that's nonverbal communication. Nonverbal. There's an old saying, an old phrase, that nonverbals are really loud. Well, what do you mean they're loud? There's no sound, it's nonverbal. Well, it's because nonverbals tend to send a message that people see and hear. For example, in class, I'll be watching a student group making a presentation, and over at the podium, one of the team members who really worked hard for this, did some studying, etc., practiced their presentation, is delivering this presentation, really wants to do a good job, and thinks it's really important, whatever he or she's saying. But over on the side, the teammates, instead of paying attention to the speaker, instead of being respectful, they're looking at their watch, they're talking to each other, showing things on the phone or whatever. The audience generally can't hear them, but they certainly can see them. And who are they now looking at? Are they looking at the speaker who's trying to give you the most important aspect of this presentation? Or are they looking at, the idiots over on the side, and their nonverbals saying, basically their nonverbals are saying, that's not all that important, because if it was, we would have been paying attention to it, so we're not paying attention to it. Well, if they're not paying attention to it, why should you and the audience pay attention to it? So think about this concept that nonverbal communications are really loud. We have people constantly telling us things and writing us things. But when you take a look at things, it's a lot less what you say or write and a lot more about what you do that really counts, or at least really should count. So be very careful. Those nonverbals, as I say, nonverbal communication is very, very loud. Well, let's go to the last of the topics I want to talk about in the first part of this presentation of mine, the first part of this lecture. And that talks about something called the 5 C's of success, the 5 C's of communication. Authors always love to play games, right? They always come up with these little cute phrases and things like that. And our authors did too, the 5 C's of communication. They found 5 words that all begin with C that they say, if you remember these 5 C's, it might help you with the communication. The interesting thing is, this is actually probably true with regard to what they're saying. The 5 C's that they're talking about, it's pretty easy to remember. It's 5 C's, right? And the words are all kind of short. If you remember these 5 C's, it might help you to communicate better. And all 5 of them are pretty good. The first C is you should be clear. When you're speaking to somebody, writing to somebody, be clear. Well, don't mumble, don't hesitate, don't be say something ambiguous. Be clear. Let people know exactly what you're saying. That's not a bad idea. The second C is be complete. Be complete. Don't just tell me part of it. Tell me everything I need to know. You probably have been in classrooms where a teacher gives you some instructions on what to do, and the teacher only tells you a little bit, doesn't tell you the whole, but expects you to know the whole. Well, wonderful. How good is your crystal ball? I don't know about yours. Mine doesn't work that well. So if you don't tell me the complete story, don't expect me to know the complete story. So another thing you want to do with regard to communication is you want to be complete. The third C is you want to be correct. If you're telling somebody something, whether again it's verbal or writing or whatever it is, it's probably a good idea to tell them the correct stuff. Don't make a mistake. Go back and check. You're selling something to somebody and say, oh, you know what? This has a capacity to do 10 widgets an hour or something like that. And it turns out that you were wrong. It only does 5 an hour. Well, you sell it for 10. Guess what? You have a customer who's not happy. Customer might bring it back and want money back. Customer might sue you. Customer may never come back to you again after this is all resolved. Why should I trust you, etc. So another thing you want to do is you want to be correct. Let's take a look at the fourth C. Concise. Concise. I'm an attorney, and unfortunately, because I'm an attorney, we were taught in law school, to take an agreement. 2 people shake hands on an agreement, and they say 10 words. We're then supposed to turn it into a 50-page agreement, of thousands of words. And I understand that from the legal standpoint, even as crazy as it might sound. But unfortunately, I've carried that over, and so often when I make communications with people, whether it's written or verbal, oftentimes I'm wordy. And you know what? You shouldn't be wordy. Be concise. If you can say it in 3 words, say it in 3 words. If it takes 60 words, say 60, but not 80. And one of the problems I have is oftentimes I say more than I should. And what happens when you do that? Well, your audience doesn't have much time. It's like, oh, can't you get to the point? What are we getting to here? And they start to zone out, or they have to leave. They don't hear the whole message, etc. So another thing you want to do is be concise. Well, let's take a look at the fifth of these C's that we have. And the fifth is one that I think that you, as a member of an audience, whether the audience in my classroom or an audience anywhere, I think would truly appreciate. You want the presenter, the person talking to you, the person making a communication, to be courteous. Hey, treat me nicely. Treat me with some courteousness, a little bit of respect. It goes a long way. If you have somebody who's communicating with you who isn't courteous, who isn't respectful, no matter what the message is, the fact that they're not being courteous impacts the message. So the message might be something really good, but you're thinking that these people or the person who's making a presentation is a horse's backside. And that certainly impacts how you look at this message. So again, the 5 C's: be clear, be complete, be correct, be concise, and be courteous. I think all those can help out. Now, what we're going to do in the second part of the presentation, as you can see, it's getting darker in here, so I'm going to probably wait until maybe tomorrow to finish this off. But in the second part of the presentation, we're going to take a look at the final 3 major topics here. And again, we're going to be taking a look at keys to success and useful tools. That's where we'll start off. Then we'll talk about presentations, and then we'll take a look at those other issues, particularly with regard to voicemail and email. So we'll be right back, and let's take a look at the next major topic. Let's take a look at keys to success. Okay, let's take a look at the second part of our lecture today, the 3 topics I wanted to talk about. And the first of those is called Keys to Success, some useful tools that might help you be successful in your communications. The first I'm going to talk to you about is a model that has been presented and a lot of people use when they're making a presentation, but it's even when you're sending someone a letter or writing them some sort of written communication. And this model can be quite helpful. It's not unlike the 5 C's, something you can quickly think about. Uh, and this one has a rather strange name. It's an acronym. Each letter in this name is capitalized. Each letter will stand for a word. Some people put periods after each letter. I mean, that's certainly up to you how you want to handle it. Let me first pronounce it for you, and then I'll spell it. This tool to help you get some success in your communications is known as PABOK. PABOK. It's known as a PABOK model, PABOK analysis, PABOK. And PABOK is spelled, again, all capitals, P-A-I-B-O-C. P-A-I-B-O-C. So let me tell you what each of those letters stands for, and I might have a few comments for each of them as well. The P in PABOK stands for purpose. When you're communicating with someone, don't lose sight of your purpose. Have you ever been to a meeting where people go off on tangents because they forgot the purpose? Have you ever been in a phone conversation where people go off on tangents? Have you ever seen someone send you an email or something, or maybe a text, and they're starting on this topic, but then they go to 10 other topics and they never really come back to it? That's because they forgot about their purpose. So one of the things you want to do in order to have successful communications is you want to keep in mind, what's your purpose? Why am I doing this? There has to be a reason. I'm here, I'm presenting to this group, or I'm writing to that person, or whatever. There has to be a reason. Don't lose sight of that reason. Remember, we talked about the general purposes of communication: to inform, persuade, and build goodwill. And you probably have some more specific reasons as well, some specific purposes as well. Don't lose sight of your purpose. Let's take a look at the second letter of PABOK, the A, and that stands for audience. You want to know who your audience is. You want to do an audience analysis. You want to make sure that whatever it is you're saying, you say in a way that fits your audience. I think in class we talked about, if you have the same thing to say to both the dean of the business school as well as a 5-year-old, you probably will say it differently to them. Not only will you use perhaps different words and tones, you might have different body gestures, etc. For one that you wouldn't have for the other. Well, why? Well, that's because your audience is different. So one of the things you want to do is you want to do an audience analysis. You want to fit your communication, whether it's a written or verbal communication, you want to fit it so that it fits your audience. You're not lying, you're not changing the facts, you're just trying to fit your communication to fit the audience. Again, if you left classroom and were bumped into the dean, and the dean asked you, what did you do in class? And there was also a 5-year-old who asked you, what did you do in class? They're asking you for the same information, you're just going to package it differently. So again, the second letter is A, and that stands for audience. Let's go to the third letter. It's I, and that stands for information. You have to consider, what information do you want to share? How much information do you want to share? If you think about it, it's pretty easy, although it might take a longer time. It's pretty easy when you have a lot of information just to do an information dump. You just give everybody all the information. There are times you don't want to do that. Maybe they don't have the attention span, they don't have the time. All of a sudden now, instead of sending them a short email or text or letter, all of a sudden now you're sending them an epistle. It's so long, etc., that they're not going to read it from start to end. Or maybe you have something to say. Remember, one of the 3 C's was being concise, and all of a sudden you become quite wordy. I know quite often a lot of students on projects that I give to them. Sometimes I'll give them a minimum word if it's a written project.
minimum of 500 words, 200 words, 1,000 words, whatever it might be. But when I give them a minimum, if I don't give them a maximum, some students somehow think their grade is related to the number of words they send to me. So, okay, yeah, the minimum is 500, but boy, I'm giving you 1,500. But indeed, you probably could have covered the whole thing in 501. Yeah. So again, you want to take a look at how much information. It's not necessarily you want to give them all. You want how much. Now, again, going back to something we talked about earlier in the 3 C's, you want to be complete. But again, do you have time to be complete? And if you don't, if there's additional information or greater details, etc., maybe you provide some alternative source for them. Oh, we can meet again, or I have something on a website, or here's some flyer that we've put together, brochure that we put together, etc., where you might be able to have that. So again, the third letter here is I, and it stands for information. Well, still with payback, let's go to the letter B. And the letter B stands for benefits. Benefits. Now, if you think about it, all of us are really busy. All of us. We have lots of communication devices that constantly are telling us, pay us attention. How often have you been someplace and you hear your phone, you got a text, you got a phone call or whatever, and you're absolutely dying. I got to check. I got to see who wrote me or, who called me, etc. So we have that going on. Of course, we have a million things we have to do. Where many of us are multitasking. You got a couple different classes, a couple different assignments. You might be working someplace, etc. So one of the problems that we have is we don't have a tremendous amount of time. So when someone communicates with us, usually one of the first things we do is we ask, what's in it for me? We look for the benefit. In fact, if you think about it, most people that you have in an audience, whether it's an audience that you're talking to or an audience you send something in writing, most people, if you think about it, are listening to a radio station. I know it sounds crazy, but they're listening to a radio station. They're listening to station WIIFM. WIIFM, which stands for, the words I just said a little bit ago, what's in it for me? They want to know what's in it for me. If I give you the time that you need to say something to me, for me to read something you send, if I give you that time, what's in it for me? Am I wasting my time? I want you to think about this also. Let's say that you're watching TV, and I know most people nowadays don't watch as much TV as a couple generations ago, but we still watch a little. And let's say that you have a chance to watch some TV, and with regard to what you're going to watch, you don't really know what's on. There's no favorite program you want to watch. So, the big game's not on. Some weekly series you watch isn't on, etc. So what you do is you sit down, you get the remote control, and assuming nobody else is in the room, you turn it on to whatever channel, and you just give it a couple of seconds, and the next thing you know, unless it catches your attention, you click it to the next one, you click it to the next one, you click it to the next one. Well, what you're seeing there is you're going to stop at a channel that gives you something that benefits you in some way. It either entertains you in a way that you want to see, it does something that you want. It gives you a benefit. Excuse me. Now, there's another aspect, though, about benefit that you really want to know about. And that is there's another word that is oftentimes associated with benefit, and we sometimes interchange them, but they shouldn't be. And that's the word feature. Look at the concept of features and benefits. People want to hear about benefits, but we oftentimes want to tell them about features. Now, I understand that. And that goes back to this concept of we want to inform, right? So let's say, for example, you are selling a car that you have, a vehicle you have. Let's say, for example, you have a Jeep Wrangler. It's a used one. You've had it for a number of years. It worked well. It's not broken, but it's time now to get rid of that. You're going to buy another car, rent another car, something that's more suited for you. So you put out the word. You advertise this on the web. You might put in the newspaper, some flyers around campus, and somebody calls up, reaches out to you and says, "Oh, yeah, tell me about the vehicle." And let's say one of the key aspects of the vehicle that you've got to tell them about is it's four-wheel drive. Well, the fact it's four-wheel drive, that's certainly a feature. Probably a good one you want to mention to people, particularly living around here, etc. But don't just tell them the feature, tell them the benefit. How's four-wheel drive going to benefit somebody living around central Pennsylvania? Well, it snows here a lot. We have ice and snow, and the four-wheel drive will help to get you to work. Will get you, to pick up the kids or, whatever it might be. So one of the things you want to do is you just don't tell them about the feature, you tell them about the benefit. The same type of thinking goes with a resume. A resume is filled with features about you. Here you're trying to sell yourself to an employer, trying to persuade them to hire you. And one of the first communications you have with them is you provide them with a resume, usually on a website someplace or whatever. And that resume you have is just filled with features, right? So let's say, for example, one of the features you have on there is you worked, last summer, you worked as a bagger at a grocery store. Well, that's all fine and dandy. I'm glad that you worked. But the person listening to you, the recruiter, the person who's hiring, is not just looking at the feature. They want to know the benefit. Okay, so you work there. How's that going to help me? Well, the benefit is, well, listen, I was the only one who worked the evening shift, so, it's totally on me. I was, someone who was results oriented. I always got the job done well. I've got, my boss said I did a great job, etc. With regard to this, you can rely on me. I'm going to get the job done. Things like that. Now all of a sudden we turned the feature into a benefit. Now maybe on a resume it's hard to put more than just features, but you can a little bit. But certainly in your cover letter, certainly in the interview, etc., that's when you want to bring up this concept of benefit. It's not just a feature, show them the benefit. Again, why? They're listening to that radio station. What's in it for me? What's the benefit? Tell them the benefit. Let's go to the next letter in PABOK, and it's the O, and it stands for the word objections. Objections. Let's face it, anytime you talk to somebody or you write something to somebody, not everybody's going to agree with what you say. Even if you're delivering this presentation or this writing to somebody you really like, a close friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a family member, etc. How many times do people argue? Think about this. If you went home over winter break or you went home over summer break, you go home over summer break, and you're back with family, and you're all happy about being with family, and let's say you get along really well with your family and your friends, etc. Even though you're happy to be back and you want to be back, etc., my guess is over the break you had an argument. At least one, maybe a couple, hopefully not a lot, but a couple. And one of the things is because people have objections to what you say. And I'm not necessarily talking about, people in politics, this side says this and this side said that, etc. Take a look. If someone says, hey, what do you want to do this weekend? Oh, let's go out for pizza. I don't want to go out for pizza. We went out last week for pizza. Let's do this, that, or the other. So there's oftentimes an objection. Not always, but oftentimes an objection. So what PABOK is saying is before you make the communication, try to think in advance what objections your audience is going to have. And if you can think of that in advance, you then can be prepared when they raise and say, well, we just had pizza last night. So yeah, okay, we did, but we're on short on money. We don't have a whole lot. The pizza, I got a coupon here, etc. So be ready for the objection. Know what's coming up and be ready for it. And then the last letter of PABOK is the C. And the C stands for the word context. Context. When you make a communication, whether you wrote a 4-volume book or whether you sent somebody a 3-word text or whether you said a few words on the phone or you delivered an hour-long speech, what you should do is you should keep in mind that your communication is just one part of a big puzzle that everybody's living through, one part of a big system that everybody's in. So you should put your communication in context. How does it fit? And that also can help you, again, going back to that audience analysis. Let's say, for example, that you are going to make a presentation to a group of students, and you found out before you went in there that a couple of the students had just come back from COVID, they've been knocked off their feet, etc., with regard to COVID. And let's say that you're going in, and let's say, for example, I mentioned to you my younger son is in med school. Let's say he's giving a presentation on COVID, and he has to come to our class, and all of a sudden he knows it. Well, one of the things he should do is you should keep in mind that his presentation is just one small part of this whole world everybody's in. You should recognize that, and then try to make his presentation fit into the context. He might be more empathetic. He might say, hey, listen, I understand quite a few of you have suffered from this recently. Try to make a connection, an emotional connection with the people. So one of the things you want to do is put it in context. You may be thinking that what you want to communicate is the most important thing that has ever been said or written in the history of mankind or humankind or whatever. Odds are it's not. It's going to have to fit into the context, into the world, into the system, into the puzzle of your audience. Now that finishes up this concept of paybox. Certainly one of the tools you might want to use. Again, purpose, audience, information, benefits, objections, and context can help you as you're preparing to deliver some sort of communication. There's another tool that is very similar to paybox. In fact, a lot of people use this tool instead of paybox. Let me pronounce it for you and tell you a little bit about it and ask you to do something. This tool is called PACE. PACE. It's all capital letters, just like paybox. Each letter, it's an acronym. Each letter stands for a word. And PACE is spelled P-A-C-E. P-A-C-E. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to take a look at my notes that I have on Canvas. I'd like you to take a look at your textbook. And I'd like you to get an idea of what is PACE. How does it differ from paybox? Is it better? Is it worse? Does it fit this situation and not that situation? I'd like you to get a general idea about it. I don't look at you as becoming an expert at PACE, but I would like you to know that this other tool exists, and you may find that this tool is actually better for you, or you feel more comfortable working with this tool than paybox. So take a look and figure out what PACE is. Well, still in this concept of keys for success and tools, the next topic I want to talk about is related to something we just did, and that is audience analysis. How do you analyze your audience? Again, we know we want to make our communication fit, but how do we do that? How do we analyze an audience? The textbook mentions that there are two general methods, very broad methods to do it. I'm sure there are probably some others as well, but the two broad methods are pretty good. The first way to analyze your audience is to look at your audience from a demographic standpoint. Let's say, for example, you're going to be delivering a presentation and your audience is made up of other students like you, right? Versus you're making a presentation and you're going to be making a presentation to a whole bunch of old people like me. Is your presentation going to differ? Sure, right? You know, there's some things that the older generation knows about that the younger generation doesn't. There's some things that the younger generation knows about that the older doesn't, and various differences of values and whatever. So one of the things you want to do is take a look at your audience from a demographic standpoint, age and some other things with regard to the typical things under demographics, because that might help you to better fit your communication based on the demographics of your audience. Well, that's one of the ways, and it's a good way to analyze your audience, but there's another way. And really good, really persuasive communicators tend to be really, really good in this other way. I'm not necessarily going to say it's a better way, but it's certainly a really good way, and I guess in some ways it might be better. And this next way is to do a psychological analysis. It's also known as a psychoanalysis of your audience. What you want to do is you want to get an idea of how your audience thinks and feels. What are their attitudes? What are their interests and opinions, etc.? Because if you can fit your presentation to how they feel, if you can say, hey, I know how you feel. I feel like you do too. This will help you. You'll connect with the audience much quicker, perhaps to a deeper way. An example that I mentioned in class, two presidents who come from both sides of the aisle. One was a liberal, one was a conservative, one was a Republican, one was a Democrat. were really good at doing this when they were making presentations. The one was Ronald Reagan, a Republican and a conservative, and when he would go out and make a speech or whatever, a lot of people didn't like what he had to say, but he was known as the great communicator because he'd get there and it was like he had radar, coming up, and he could immediately start to figure out what his audience felt like, and he could kind of package what he had to say that way. The other side of the aisle, the other one I want to give to you, is Bill Clinton, certainly a liberal and a Democrat. Same thing. A lot of people didn't agree with what he was saying, but when he would make a presentation, he'd make a speech or whatever. He once again, he really his words resonated with so many people. He even people who didn't like him, just like with regard to Reagan, they didn't like what he was saying, but they liked him. So what he did was the same thing. He had this radar that came up, and he could feel how you felt, and he could kind of package what he was saying that way. And I'm not saying that either of these two gentlemen lied. They're politicians. Maybe that's part of being a politician. But I'm not saying that they lied, but they found ways to connect with their audience through I feel like you feel. I know how you feel. I respect how you feel doing this psychoanalysis. I think that it can certainly help with you in the way that you present. Again, whether you're making an oral or verbal presentation, whether you're making a written presentation, can certainly help if you can do that psychoanalysis. So what we have here is we just finished up the fourth major topic, and this was some tools, some keys to success, and some tools you can use to be successful. Let's now take a look at the next major topic that we want to take a look at. Let's take a look at making presentations. Hi everybody, let's continue on with communications, and let's go to our fifth major topic for today, and that's making presentations. Now let's face it, all of you have made lots of presentations. You probably know how to do them, but one of the things you want to keep in mind is there's probably ways to make your presentations even better. So some of the things that we'll talk about today hopefully will improve your presentations a little bit. There might be some ideas of how to tweak your presentations, make them a little bit better. Let's start off with the first major topic, some interesting surveys that were taken of presentations and what people in the audience thought of them, etc. with regard to it. And this particular survey was done a number of times, and the numbers, the answers, the results are all about the same, and it's kind of interesting. If you think about when you make a presentation, you probably are making a presentation because you want people to remember what you're saying. Maybe you're presenting for a company and you're trying to sell something. Maybe you're presenting about yourself, you're trying to get a job. So what you're looking at is you want people to remember the content of your presentation. Well, let's take a look at what people tend to remember in this survey. According to this survey, only 7% of what people remembered after a presentation was what you said. Only 7% was what you said, the content. Of all the things they're going to remember, only 7% of what they remember is the content of your presentation. That's horrible, right? Now, 38% of what they're going to remember is the way that you said it. Oh, this person was loud, this person was soft, this person had enthusiasm, this person was dull, etc. It was the way that you said it. And 55% of what they're going to remember is how you looked when you said it. Oh, that person wore a blue suit. That person wore, a red dress. That person had a tie, didn't have a tie. That person looked sloppy. That person looked great. Well, think about it. It's great, that hopefully they'll remember how you look, and if you're really looking great, that's wonderful. But that's not why you're making the presentation. You're not making it so that they'll remember how you said it, 38%, or that 55% what they're going to remember is how you looked when you said it. You want them to remember the content, but only 7% of what they remember is the content. So you've got an interesting problem there, right? That's why you're there, the content. Most of them aren't going to remember it. So let's go to the second point here under making presentations, and that's how to make your content memorable. What can we do to push that 7% up just a little bit? Even if we could get up to 10%, that's good. It'd be great if we could get it up to 25, 50, 75% or whatever. But even if you could get it up just a little bit. So your authors make some suggestions on how to make content memorable, and we'll talk as we go through today some other things as well that might help to make it more memorable. The first thing they suggest to help make your content more memorable is be prepared. If they remember how you said it, what you look like saying it, if you're prepared, the odds are you're not going to look like you're fumbling around, don't know what's going on, etc. So one of the things you're going to do to help them remember it is you want to be prepared. They'll remember that. Oh, that person really knew what he or she was talking about. The second thing that they suggest, and I'm a real believer in this, is they say you should repeat your message's key points. Repeat your message's key points. Now, you probably have heard that advertisements that are run on TV, studies have been done that say, oh, people don't remember things on an ad they've seen on TV unless they've seen it, I think it's 7 times, might even be more. So what we see is we see that repetition, etc. Well, how can you repeat your key points from a presentation? I'm presenting, to an audience of, excuse me, attorneys or whatever. What am I going to do? Be a parrot up there and say the same thing 4 or 5 times? Well, maybe there's a way to do that. One of the ways I suggest to be able to repeat your key points multiple times is you should say your key points in your opening. Oh, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Neil Fogarty. I'm from the Penn State University Smeal College of Business, and I'm here to talk to you about, whatever the topic is. I'm going to focus on particularly 3 points. I'm going to talk to you about point A and point B and point C. And as we go through this, I'm going to try to tie those all together. So one of the first places we want to talk about this, where we can mention it, is where I mention it in the opening. We're also going to have, I hope, a closing to our presentation. And the closing shouldn't be, well, that's it, thanks so much. Any questions, let me know. It's a horrible closing. What you need is what's called a wrap-up closing, a summarizing type of closing. Well, if you have a wrap-up or a summarizing type of closing, that's a great time to run these points by everybody again. Say, well, listen, okay, I'm done now. And just to summarize, the key points that I talked about today are point A, point B, and point C. And it's very, very important that you know about these things. Based on what I said. If you have any questions, certainly let me know. I'll have the PowerPoint available for you. I'll have something on the website for you. And again, you can take a look at these points, point A, B, and C. Hopefully they've resonated with you. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Well, there, I just said it a couple times, and it's just in the closing. Well, also another place that you can talk about it, of course, is in the main body of your presentation. Okay, here's point A, and here's point B, and here's point C. But there's another place to say it, and that is you should have transitions, you should have segues between the various topics that you have or between speakers that you have. Let's say, for example, I'm making a presentation, and in this presentation, it's actually a team presentation. Let's say there's 2 other people presenting with me from Penn State, Dr. Smith and Dr. Brown or something like that. What we'll do is I'll probably talk a little bit, and then we'll have Dr. Brown talk a little bit, and then Dr. Smith talk a little bit, etc. So one of the things that you should do is you should have a transition, a segue between those speakers. Well, here's a great time to repeat the key points. So let's say, for example, in the opening, I said, we're going to talk about points A, B, and C. Okay, I'm going to be your first speaker today, and again, my name is Neil Fogarty, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on, we mentioned we're going to talk about A, B, and C, and I'm going to focus on A, and a little bit later on, Smith is going to talk about B, and Brown's going to talk about C. So let me talk about A. So notice I just transitioned from the introduction to my speech, and I've mentioned point A a couple of times, and I've also mentioned B and C. So I go through and I talk about point A. At the end of that, before I transition to Dr. Smith or Brown, whoever was going to be next, well, I'll say, well, listen, thanks so much. That finishes up my presentation on my portion of this, which was point A. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have, Dr. Smith talk to you about point B. And again, remember, after Dr. Smith, we're going to have Dr. Brown talk to you about point C. Notice I just said A, B, and C again, so I've just repeated those points. So when Dr. Smith then comes up to the podium and starts to talk, hopefully a good way to do this transition is Dr. Smith will say something like, oh, Neil, thanks so much for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Smith. I'm from Penn State, etc. And as Neil mentioned, he just talked about part A. I'm going to be talking about part B. And a little bit later, we're going to have, Dr. Brown over here talk about part C. So notice he just said it in his transition. So there was a transition where I sent it to him, and a transition where he took it and then went running with it. So we have it in that transition. We've said it a couple of times there. So Dr. Smith, or whoever is talking second, he or she's now going to talk about point B. Now when Dr. Smith is done with that, same thing with this transition, with this segue from Dr. Smith to Dr. Brown. Dr. Smith will say something like, well, thank you so much for your time. I've concluded now talking about part A. Earlier Neil talked about part B. Neil talked about part A. I just concluded on part B. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Brown, who's going to talk to you about part C. Dr. Brown, what do you have to say? So notice in that transition, the first part of the transition is passing it off to the speaker. Didn't he just mention, or didn't she just mention A, B, and C again? Absolutely. So then when Dr. Brown comes up to speak, Dr. Brown's going to say, hey, Dr. Smith, thanks so much for the introduction. Hi, everybody, I'm Dr. Brown. And as you know, we've already talked about part A and part B. I'm here to talk to you about part C. Well, let's get into it. Well, notice we just said A, B, and C again. So now Dr. Brown's going to talk about part C. And when Dr. Brown is done, Dr. Brown's going to want to segue back to me because I'm going to make the closing. So Dr. Brown's going to say, okay, great, everybody, that finishes up my presentation on part C. Now listen, so far you've heard about A, B, and C. And hopefully we've been able to tie some things together. But to really tie it together, I'm going to transition off to my colleague. We're going to bring back Neil Fogarty again. Neil, how would you like to close this out for us? So there's a transition to me, and what did Dr. Brown say? He said A, B, and C in there, right? So I'm going to come in and say, hey, Dr. Brown, that was great. Thanks so much. And also, Dr. Smith, thank you so much. Again, everybody, now you've had a chance to listen to this. We've talked about A, B, and C. I talked about A. Smith talked about B. Brown talked about C, etc. And, we're really excited about this, and we really think there's a lot that A, B, and C can do for you, etc. And that's where I go to that closing I talked to you a little bit ago, and where I'll say it again as I close. So notice now how many times I've said A, B, and C, or we've said A, B, and C in a presentation. So in the introduction, we said it in each of the parts, we said it in each of the segues, etc., and then we said it at the closing. So did we repeat our 3 points? You betcha, we repeated a lot. But did we sound like a parrot? No, because we didn't say it over and over again right after one another. There were breaks, etc., and different people speaking, etc., so we're able to do that. So I highly recommend one of the things you want to do is with regard to the key points of your message, repeat them. If you want people to remember content, repeat it. The last point that the authors make about making your content memorable, I think, is another great one. And that is, they say you should paint pictures with your words. Oh, you should use all sorts of, PowerPoints and other things like that. But just with your words, you should paint pictures with your words. People tend to remember visuals or things they envision in their head more than they will remember, or longer than they will remember, the various points that you said, the technicalities of what you said. So you should paint pictures. And how do you do this? Well, a couple ways. You can give examples. You notice, for example, as we go through our class, I'll give you lots of examples. So why am I doing that? I'm trying to paint pictures. You might not remember the key points I'm talking about, but you probably remember the example that I gave to you. And if you remember the example, then I'll help you to remember the key points that I talked about. Another thing you probably want to do is tell stories. Storytellers are really good at making things memorable. If you think about it, some of the most remembered religious texts that we have, of all the different religions that we have, often they were started just by people telling stories. No, those stories have lasted centuries because of that. People tend to remember stories. So they might not remember every part of it, but they remember the story because they can see it, they can vision it. So another thing I would highly recommend that you do is tell some stories. Stories that hopefully are related to the point and kind of show the point, but it's not detailed technical stuff. It's a story that will show people what you're talking about, a story hopefully that they will remember. Well, let's go to the next part, the third point under this concept of presentations, etc. And this is to choose your words correctly. It's really important to choose your words correctly. How many times have you ever gotten into a conversation with somebody and something came out of your mouth that it wasn't right? Either you shouldn't have said it, or you said it in the wrong way, or you gave something inaccurate, etc. So one of the things you want to do is you want to choose your words correctly. You don't want to offend people. You want to make a good impression on people.
So you want to choose your words correctly. I would say another way of looking at it is choose your words carefully. How are you going to say it with regard to it? For example, let me give you an example here. When my older son now, who's about 25 years old or whatever, when he was just finishing up kindergarten and getting ready to go into first grade, when he was about 5, 6 years old, back about that time, one of the things they talked to him about at the end of kindergarten is they talked to him about something that over the summer that he and others could join, and it was a YMCA summer camp for kids. And they had different types of summer camps, etc. But for the young kids, it was usually a day camp. You'd go in the morning, etc., each day, and be picked up in the afternoon or evening each day, etc. And you go, 4 or 5 days a week on that. So they mentioned it to my son, and again, he was in kindergarten, and he was all excited, and so were the other kids. Oh, this sounds great. You can go fishing, you go horseback riding. They played some sports. They went through the mountains, etc. Sounded like it could be a pretty good time. So he came home and he was all excited about this, and he said to us, my wife and I, oh my gosh, I got to go, please sign me up, etc. So we looked at the materials that they sent home, and it looked like a pretty good deal, and it wasn't very expensive, and they held them virtually every week of the summer, beginning actually the following week when school let out, all the way to maybe about 2 weeks before school was supposed to begin again in the fall. So he said, oh, I got to go, I got to go. And we thought, well, that's a good idea. And he actually wanted to go the very next week. I mean, he was so excited. He didn't want to wait, right? He wanted to go the very next week. But we mentioned to him, he said, well, maybe you should indeed wait a week or two. Let's see what your friends are doing. When are they going? People are going on vacation. Sometimes when you get out of school, you just want to take a week to figure out who you are, etc., like that. Let us wait. And he said, oh, no, I got to go, I got to go. Okay, so we signed him up for the first week. And when that first week came, on the first day on Monday, I was the one who was going to drop him off. I was going to be going in at the time I was teaching at Pitt. I had a morning class, so I was going to drive by where this YMCA was. It was a camp at North Park in Allegheny County, and I was going to drop him off, etc., and then I'd just go on to work. So he's all excited, and he's in the back seat, and he's got all the little things I told the kids to bring, particularly on the first day. So as I drive up to this area in North Park, there are indeed a whole bunch of tables that are set up and some signs that are hanging up that people put up, etc. And most of the camp counselors were either high school kids or more likely college students like you. And so as I drive up, I noticed that there weren't a whole lot of cars there yet. There were some kids, but not a whole lot. Some people were signing up at the tables or whatever. But again, not a whole lot of people. We got there a little early. And I'm also thinking it's also that first week right after school, maybe not a whole lot of people signed up for this. But anyway, I open the door, my kid, goes running out, bouncing up and down and goes up to the table, and I'm there, and, hi, I'm Neil Fogarty, and this is my son, Sean, da, 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 and they looked, oh, yeah, you signed him up, etc., great, okay. And, here you go, Sean, here's a name tag or something, and, we want you, go over there by the tree over there. There's a couple kids over there. Go over there, and some counselor, some high school or college students over. Go over and talk to him or her. Great. So he bounces. I see it, and off he goes. And the counselor looks at me, and I'm kind of, what's going on? Because I looked at the kids over there. There were only a couple of kids over there, and they're all sorts of different ages. Oh, don't worry about it. You're just early here. It'll be a great time. Have fun. Okay. So I went back in the car. Went to Pitt. At the end of the day, as I'm coming back from Pitt, I go to pick him up, and the pickup time was, say, 4 o'clock or something like that. And I got there, and it's a little late, not too much, about 4:15 or something. And as I drive up, most of the people have already picked up their kids. So as I drive up, most of the parking lot now is empty. Usually it's filled with people picking and dropping off kids or what. Most of it's empty, but the tables are still there and the signs are still up. And there's a couple of the counselors are still there and a couple of kids. So I drive up, and there's my son. So he sees me and he comes running out and he hops in the car, etc. And we start driving home. And as we're driving home, I'm asking him, what did you do? What did you do? Oh, and he's so excited. Oh, they saw a snake and they, got poison ivy and they did this and they did that and they ran and threw and did all this stuff. Okay, great. And amongst this excitement, as I'm driving home on Route 19, which is a fairly busy road in the northern part of Pittsburgh,
as I'm driving home, watching the lights and watching traffic, etc. And he's sitting in the back telling me his story, etc., what was going on, and I'm asking him some questions as we go along. At one point, he asked me a question, and it was one of those questions that as soon as he asked it, I almost had an automobile accident. I didn't know if I should stop the car or whatever because I was just so astounded. He said, "Dad, tell me what does," and he asked me about a word, "what does X mean?" And the word he asked me about, well, it's normally hyphenated. Sometimes people put it together, sometimes it's two words. And well, to put it gently, I won't belabor it. The first word had the word jacking in it, and I'll let you figure out what the last word was. It's three letters beginning with the word O. And he said, "What does jacking mean?" Now he's 5 or 6. And I know that parents are told, oh, always be truthful with your kids with regard to sex, but he's 5 or 6. Is this something I really want to be talking about to a 5 or 6 year old? And as I said, I almost drove off the road. I mean, I didn't expect him to be talking about that. I said, well, where'd you hear that, etc. He said, well, you were right, Dad. Not a whole lot of kids were there from my age group. So they had, the boys and the girls were separated. And they put me in this group with a bunch of, a couple of other boys. And the boys were primarily about 12, 13 years old. And he said, we had a great time, swimming and our stuff like that. And they were really nice to me. They pushed me here and there and the other, but they were really pretty nice to me, etc. But they were talking about it. Well, a 13-year-old boy talking about that, well, maybe I can understand that. But a 5-year-old, not so much. So I am sweating bullets as I'm driving home, trying to figure out how am I going to answer this? Because again, I don't want to lie to this kid, but on the other hand, this is not something I want to talk to a 5-year-old about. So it occurs to me as I'm driving, one of these lightning bolt ideas that oftentimes are not really good ideas hits me. And this lightning bolt of an idea that hits me says, hey, the first word of this is the word jacking. And that sounds like if you have a flat tire, you jack up your car. So there's my answer. There's my out. Sighing with relief and happy, I turn and say, oh, Sean, that word, it means someone had a flat tire. They were jacking up their car and they're going to change it. Oh, okay, great. He's 5. It meant nothing to him. Right over the head. He went on now talking about, snakes or, lizards or something like that. And so, thank goodness, we're past that. And as we're driving home and going in, I'm glad I said that because I'm sure my wife is going to ask him, and if he happens to mention this to her, I know I'm going to be the one in trouble. Where did he heard this word? It had to be you. You're a guy, etc. So anyway, everything's just fine. And he goes for the next 4 or 5 days at this camp, and everything's just great. And a couple more younger kids his age did show up. He just wasn't with the 13-year-olds, etc. That weekend, camp is over. That weekend, an event was going on, not related to camp. My wife and I go to 2 different churches. We get along really well, and we both respect each other's religious beliefs. And her church was having a special event that Saturday, I think it was. And I forget, it was a party for something. I don't know what it was, and it was outdoors because it was beautiful, beautiful weather. And they had some signs and bingo and other things that were going on. It was a family thing, and there was going to be some, races and barbecue and whatever, etc. It was going to be at the church. So my wife was involved in the planning of that. She was in the decorating committee or something like that. She was involved, etc. So she left early, and now I'm going to bring my 2 sons, Sean and then my other son, to it. So, when it's time to go, great, we hop in a car and we go to it, etc. And as we're driving to the church's parking lot, we have to drive by the house where the preacher, the minister, lives. And Sean looks out the window and he says, oh, hey, he's out in the driveway, and he waves, etc. Okay, great. So, we pull in, etc. And as we get in, as we start to walk to where all the people have massed and, there's music and other things going on, balloons and whatever, I see my wife and a couple of other of the church elders are together, and they seem to be somewhat worried. And we get up there, and hi, how you doing, etc. And I got the 2 boys in tow, etc. The one is say 5 or 6, and the other one was 4 or 5. And
Apparently, there's a brouhaha going on that the preacher hasn't shown up. He was supposed to be there for the start of this. He hasn't been there yet, etc. And they're wondering, where's the preacher? And as I said, I'm kind of new to this thing, right? It's her church, it's not mine. Before I can say something like, oh, we just passed his house, he's probably on his way, Sean is tugging at my sleeve, and he's saying, "Oh, I know, I know, I know." And Sean, quiet. We'll tell you. I know, I know. And my wife looks at him and said, "Oh, do you know where the preacher is? Where is he?" And out of the mouth of babes, right? My son, who had seen the preacher, well, apparently, as the preacher I mentioned, the preacher was in the driveway by his car. Apparently, his car had a flat tire. So my son said, "Oh, I saw him. He's at his house. He's jacking." Needless to say, at that moment, you could have heard a pin drop. It was like the entire festival or whatever stopped. Everybody is aghast. Mouths are dropping open like, "Oh my God, what did he say?" And I'm trying to think, "Oh my God, how do I fix this?" So eventually, I have as a husband a interesting time explaining this to my wife, how this came about. We're jacking up the tire had something to do with this other word that 13-year-old boys are using. But I want you to think about it. Isn't it important to choose your words carefully? Had I not used the word jacking for a car, this never would have happened. So one of the things that we want to take a look at now is this topic of choosing your words carefully, choosing your words correctly. A couple of things that your textbook says here is you want to be truthful. You can do a little bit of spin in what you're saying. If you're really excited about something, add some enthusiasm to it. Don't lie, don't be unethical, etc. Be truthful. But again, you choose your words correctly to make it sound like it's a good idea because you really believe it is. Another suggestion they have here with choosing your words correctly is try to avoid absolutes and instead use fudge words. Absolutes, oh, it's the absolute best, it's the absolute worst, etc., with regard to that. And, sometimes when you speak in absolutes, people actually believe you. For example, my father, God bless his soul, my father was president of two different steel companies. And he talked in absolutes. Something was always the best or the worst, etc. He always talked in absolutes. And for example, let's say that, when I was still living at home, let's say I got home and my father was watching a football game, which I've missed most of. And my father said, "Oh, it's the absolute best game you ever saw. You can't believe it's the absolute best." Or, something else would go on, "Oh, it's the absolute best or the absolute worst." It was always absolute. So when you talk in absolutes and use them a lot, two things. Sometimes people actually believe you. "Oh my gosh, it must be the best." And then when they watch this, that's not the best. And they get to the point that they don't believe you anymore. Your credibility is sunk. "Oh, it must be good, at least in your eyes, but clearly it's not the best. It's not the worst, etc." So avoid absolutes. But there's another reason to use these fudge words. Oftentimes, things will come back to haunt you. Let's say, for example, you're selling a machine, and this machine, you work for a company that builds these machines, and these are machines that put bottle caps on bottles, on these glass bottles or whatever, beer bottles or whatever, plastic bottles, water bottles or whatever. That puts these caps on. So you sell these to companies that have lots of bottles that they're filling up. Maybe a soda pop company, a water company is selling water, whatever. And you go into a store, look how many bottles of water are sold, or how many bottles of pop, or whatever. So they make a lot. So the finding a machine to put the caps on is important. So let's say that you go and someone says, "Oh, how many caps will this put on bottles in an hour?" If you use a specific number, "Oh, it'll do 710," the buyer or prospective buyer believes you and expects 710. If it's 709, 711, if it's 50 or if it's 1400, they're not going to be happy with you. They're going to come back to you. Now, if it's higher, they're probably going to be okay, but much higher now, all of a sudden their production line's all screwed up. So one of the things that your author suggests, and not a bad idea, is to talk in fudge words. For example, a friend of mine was asked, he was an attorney, how many cases have you won? Instead of telling people, oh, I've won 10, I've won 110 or whatever, he'd say, I've won a lot. If you use words that are not specific, but they're fudge words, that gives you some room to maneuver later on. Somebody comes back to sue him and says, oh, you lied to me. You said you won 110 cases and you only won 109. He said, I didn't say 110. I said I won a lot. Examples of fudge words that you can use to help you with this. Make it a little less likely that someone's going to hold you specifically to something that you say. Some fudge words, probably. Oh, this machine probably caps, 100 bottles an hour or something like that. Or typically. This machine typically caps 100 an hour. Or normally the machine caps 100 an hour. Notice these fudge words, probably and typically and normally. Usually it caps 100 an hour. Another fudge word, generally. Oh, generally speaking, it caps 100 an hour. A couple other ones that I want to mention that I think are kind of interesting. You can use the phrase a number of. Oh, it caps a number of bottles an hour. What number? Going back to that attorney I was mentioning to you, one of the things he hated to give specifics to anybody. I was afraid someone's going to sue him. I notice he's an attorney and he was a litigator. He was suing everybody all the time. So he always tried not to do anything that was going to get him sued. So if somebody say, again, how many cases did you win last year? He'd say, oh, I won a number of cases. What number? A high number? A low number? No number? You don't know. But if you say that, oftentimes people don't ask you to be specific. They'll see in their mind, if you say, oh, a number, they'll see a high number, a low number, whatever, but you haven't committed yourself. So that's one of the phrases you could use, a number of. Another phrase you hear people say a lot, how many cases have you won? Oh, I've won a fraction of the cases that have come through me. A fraction. Now, normally, a fraction, when someone says, oh, I've won a fraction, it's something small. So let's say instead of how many have you won, how many cases have you lost? Oh, I've lost a fraction of the cases. So you're probably thinking when he says that to you, oh, he's only lost a couple cases, right? A fraction can be any number. 100 over 1 is a fraction. So, he's lost 100 cases, right? You're thinking he's lost 1 out of 100, and he's actually thinking 100 over another. Why? Because when someone says a fraction of, what fraction? And it's amazing. People oftentimes don't ask. They don't ask for this clarification. And the final of the fudge phrases that the textbook uses is based on what we know. Oh, how many bottles does this cap? Well, based on what we know, it caps 100. Well, that gives you plenty of room. If it doesn't cap 100, well, you know what? We didn't know this, that, the other. So it might be able to get you out. So again, avoid absolutes. Think about using fudge words. Two other points, too, about choosing your words correctly. It's highly important to try to avoid using jargon and buzzwords that other people don't know. Why use jargon and buzzwords when other people don't know them? Let me give you an example of using jargon or buzzwords where it came back in a sense that caused me a problem. When I was teaching at Pitt, in Pittsburgh, we have the corporate headquarters for a number of companies, and one of those companies asked me to come in. It was American Eagle, had asked me to come in and speak to its middle-level executives about how to think strategically. One of the classes I teach a lot of is strategic management, and they asked me to come in and teach them how to think strategically. They thought that this might help to prepare them for moving from middle-level to upper-level management, because upper-level management really has to think strategically. So I'm making arrangements to come in and speak. There's one lady in particular at FedEx who was the admin for this, and she was setting it all up. And I'd sent her all the materials in advance that she had requested. But the morning of it, the morning I was supposed to start this, it actually was a couple of days I was going to be doing this. The first morning, as I'm driving into the American Eagle headquarters, I got an email from her, or maybe it was a text, but I think at the time it was an email. And it said, urgent, we need a copy of your PowerPoints for today.
please send them, and this is what it said, all capital letters, AEIX. What the hell does AEIX mean? I'm driving a car and I'm trying to figure out AEI. She wants me to send her the PowerPoints AEIX. You know, I can see ASAP, right? Send them right now. AEIX, what's that? So while I'm driving now, I've got to call her and look her up on my contact list, hit it, and call her, etc., to find out what the hell does AEIX mean. And of course, when I call her, she's not in, and goes into her voicemail or whatever. So I keep on driving. She never gets back to me. I call her again, get voicemail again. So I finally get there, and as I'm going into the building, she meets me, and like the place is on fire. Of course, it wasn't. Where are these PowerPoints? You're supposed to send them to me AEIX. I said, what does AEIX mean? In fact, let me ask you. If someone told you to send them PowerPoints and to send them, send something, AEIX, what does that mean to you? Well, she told me AEIX stood for, maybe still stands for, American Eagle Internal Express. It was a special website that you go to. It's only an interweb or something like that. And I was supposed to go there and send it through this somehow. AEIX, I was supposed to know that? So here's something. She knew it, right? Everybody who worked at FedEx, or I'm sorry, American Eagle knew about it. Outsiders don't. So try to avoid using jargon and buzzwords that other people don't know. It might be good to identify them as, oh, if I have to use this buzzword, etc., in a presentation. Everybody, listen, I'm going to be talking about AEIX today. Let me tell you what that means. You might want to say that a couple of times because people go one ear and out the other, etc. But again, try to avoid using jargon and buzzwords. The final point about choosing your words correctly that you want to take a look at that the textbooks mentions is try to avoid using those stalling words. You've all heard it. Someone's making a presentation and all of a sudden you hear those type of words. Now, the reason we use those stalling words, the ums and the ahs and the ers and all those other words and sounds that we make, is our brain is looking for the right words to say, and it's taking it a while to figure out what to say. But our mouth is still moving. And if our mouth has nothing to, we're talking, and all of a sudden now nothing is coming from the brain, the mouth just goes, ah. So one of the things, everybody does it. There's times you just can't avoid doing it, but try not to do it. My son was at a presentation, I think he said it was yesterday. He's the one in med school. And he had mentioned this presentation was by some medical doctor somewhere. He said the guy was brilliant, but he said every minute he probably used the words and ah and or whatever, 10 times. And he said this guy was only there, for this presentation. His part of the presentation was only about 10 minutes long. He said it was just filled with ums and ers. He said if you took it out, the whole presentation probably was only about 2 or 3 minutes long. Now, I think my son was probably exaggerating, but can you imagine sitting through a presentation where it's filled with ums and ers and ahs? So try to get rid of them. You can't get rid of them all. Don't worry about that, but at least try to reduce them that you have. So let's take a look at some other things that you can do, again, to try to make your content memorable, how to make your presentation a little bit better, etc. Some really cool ideas, and I think you've seen this when you've watched others present. You probably know it, but let's see, do you know not to do it? One of the things you should do is keep in mind a good thing to do is have eye contact with your audience. How do you have eye contact with your audience? A lot of people are absolutely petrified of making a presentation, mainly because of the eye contact. I look at you, you look at me, oh my God, you're going to see that, my hair's not combed, my tie's not straight, you're going to see me wobbling or, whatever it's going to be. People become so self-conscious when they see others looking at them. But all of a sudden, that's when they get a lot of ums and ers and etc. Because instead of thinking about the presentation, they're thinking about themselves and the eye contact and other things like that. So one of the things you can do to help keep eye contact with others, but not necessarily look everybody in the eye. A professor I had in one of my college courses years ago told me this, and it's a great idea. Try doing what are called eye sweeps.
instead of just looking at one or two, people in the audience, and that can be hard to do. And what tends to happen too is if you look at people in the audience, you tend to focus on just a couple. You might have an audience of 100, but you tend to focus on two or three or four. These are the ones that are smiling back at you, etc. They're paying attention or whatever. These are your safe ones, right? Well, the trouble for them is they don't know, why the hell is this person looking at me? I mean, it's kind of creepy, you're looking at me the whole thing. So again, the thing about this concept of eye sweeps, when you go into a place to talk, what this professor told me to do is in your mind, visually, you have everybody usually seated, right? Uh, Around the room, just a little bit above their heads, draw this line that you can envision. And what you do is when you get up there to talk to this group of people, is you just look at the line and you just follow the line around the room, etc. Now, most people are going to think you're looking at them. Now, the few people in the immediate front might not, but most people in the middle and certainly in the back are going to think you're looking at them. So you do an eye sweep this way, then you eye sweep back, etc. So the eye sweeps help you to avoid direct eye contact, which might impact you. It might be disruptive of your brain thinking what I'm supposed to be saying. So another suggestion again, have eye contact, and if you're a little leery about it, think about instead of eye contact, use these eye sweeps across the room. Another thing about your presentation that you probably want to take a look at your posture. I've had people, go in and make a presentation, and the presentation is done like this. Well, if they're doing this, basically they're, again, remember we said nonverbals are very loud. Their nonverbal is telling me something, and it's not very good. I've had people leaning. I've had people that get up there and they're doing this thing. It's like, or dancing or something as we're up there. I've had people go in there, that they're slouching. I had people go in and they're like this, standing, completely straight, etc. Watch your posture. Be comfortable. This is not a posture class, but also watch your posture because, again, nonverbals are very loud. Another thing you want to do to help make your content memorable, to help make your presentation better, is to have energy and enthusiasm. If you're not interested in what you're saying, your audience isn't going to be interested in what you're saying. So even if you're talking about something that even bores the heck out of you, if you're making a presentation, find a way to get energized and enthused about that. Find a way to connect and to bring that. Because if you are just mumbling away, I gotta do this, etc., then the people listening to you are going to just go right out the window and they're going to start thinking about other things, using their phone or whatever. So have enthusiasm, have energy, find ways to energize yourself because you will energize your audience. Another suggestion given by your book with regard to, again, presentations, making your content memorable, etc. Another suggestion is watch your facial expressions. Again, nonverbals are loud. One of the things you tend to see a lot is when people present, particularly in business presentations, it's a formal presentation. So what you tend to see is very few smiles, right? It's formal business or whatever. But you know what the audience is looking for on occasion? A smile. Occasionally smile. I mean, if you're talking about something that's awful, or you're for example, at a medical conference talking about cancer or something, I understand you're not going to smile a lot. But in most presentations, there are times that you can smile. Just a little smile here, there, or the others, connect with somebody. That helps. They'll remember that. They'll help to remember what you're talking about. Another suggestion that they have here, let's see, with regard to this, is what are you going to wear? You've oftentimes heard dress for success as a phrase, dress for success. But my suggestion is not that. I instead say dress to fit, dress to fit. And let me give you an example of this. I used to have a law firm that I started. We had, 12 attorneys or something like that, primarily representing businesses. But one of the attorneys I had was a labor attorney. And we actually represented, in that case, mainly businesses, but occasionally represented unions. And one of the unions he was representing in the greater Pittsburgh area, involved in the steel industry, wasn't a steel union, but were involved in the steel industry, was a small one. They probably had, 20, 30 members. And they had just received notice that the little company that they worked at was about to close down. They're all about to be laid off. And the company was going to try to give them some sort of, help as a transition from being employed to unemployed. Of course, they could get unemployment benefits, but the union was really concerned. So the union asked us to send somebody there to talk about being laid off and what are their rights and laws and duties, what are available options for them, etc. So this one attorney, who was the attorney that represented us in labor ideas, which oftentimes involved unions, we sent him. He goes to them. It's a small union hall in a kind of a dingy little town along one of the rivers in Pittsburgh or whatever. And he gets into it. And I want you to think, most of the people in this union, they're steel workers. They didn't show up, in suits and they weren't driving Mercedes or whatever. But what did my colleague, the attorney, show up in? He drove basically a brand new Mercedes to it that he had just bought. He wore a brand new tailored Italian suit. I mean, just perfect Italian suit. He actually had cufflinks that were diamonds. He had a tie that had a tie tack that was a diamond. I think he had something up here to hold his collar down, which was made of diamonds. Now, certainly he was dressed for success. He was showing I am successful. Do you think he made a good presentation in front of all these people who are about to lose every dime they're making? All these people who are about to be in poverty or whatever? He shows up like that. Instead of being dressed for success, he should have dressed to fit. Think about it. What do you think he should have worn? Should he have driven a Mercedes? He also owned a pickup truck. It was a couple years old. It was a nice one, but it was a couple-year-old pickup truck. Would that probably not have been better? And instead of wearing the suit and the tie and all this other stuff, might have been better to go in there, maybe with a collared shirt and maybe a sweater or maybe just a sport jacket or something like that, a pair of slacks or whatever. Do you think they would have felt a little bit better? Now, I'm not saying he had to go there wearing sneakers and wearing tennis shoes and jeans and a t-shirt or whatever and a baseball cap. He probably wanted to, show, hey, I'm an attorney, so he probably wants to show a little bit more. But he should have dressed to fit instead of being dressed for success. You should think about that. Particularly, for example, if you're going for job interviews. If you get a chance to search the web and find pictures of people at that company, particularly if you can find pictures of people who you're going to be interviewing with, see what they're wearing. If this is a place, for example, my son, who is an accountant, some of the accounting firms he interviewed with, they were, you better be there in a suit, a new suit, and oftentimes a three-piece suit, etc. Others, they were more laid back. If you come in with a suit, we don't want to talk to you. We want you, a little bit less formal here. When we meet with clients, we're certainly in suit, but the overall work environment is a little bit more laid back. So one of the things he did is he would go to these interviews is he'd try to figure out what type of attire do they normally wear, because I want to fit. And I think you should too. Another suggestion that they have here with regard to your presentations and making content memorable is to articulate. Have you ever gone to a presentation where the people who are talking mumble and you can't hear them? Boy, if you want to put your audience to sleep, if you want them on their cell phones, go ahead and mumble. Or otherwise, I would highly recommend that you articulate. You want to make sure they can hear you. Clearly hear what you're saying. A related suggestion here. Another thing you want to do is you want to project. When you're making a presentation, project. You want to make sure you have the right volume so people can hear you. One of the things that I know that we've done on occasion is when we'd go to make a presentation at the law firm I had, if we'd go with a team of people, some of the people who weren't presenting, we'd have them sit in the back or stand in the back. And they could give us signals such as, we can't hear you, make it louder, etc. So one of the things you want to do is make sure you project, because if you have someone up there talking and you can't hear them, there's another way you're not going to have them remember the content. Again, they're looking out the window. Another suggestion, I think we talked about this in class. Don't be monotone. Change your tone. As you go through, again, talking about enthusiasm, things that you think are really important, raise your voice and, use and things. And at times, this might not be a bad idea to kind of get a little softer. Don't make it so they can't hear you, but get a little softer and then change your tone, etc. Don't be monotone. If you're monotone, you'll put them to sleep. But if you have multiple tones, if you change your tone, that helps to bring them back. It helps to keep them awake in what you're talking about. Another suggestion, you want to pace your speaking. You don't want to speak too fast. You don't want to speak too slow. Oh my gosh, there was someone I listened to the other day on television, and this guy is really knowledgeable, knows all sorts of things, degrees out the backside, experience, amazing experience, very bright person, but he talked so slow. Now, one of the neat things about it is his speech, which was on TV, ended up on YouTube. And I couldn't watch it on TV, honestly, and I wanted to. I couldn't. This guy was talking so slow, it was taking forever. So, anyways, on YouTube, my son showed me on YouTube how you can speed up the play. So we went to playing at 1.25, the normal speed or whatever, 1.5, and we sped it up. And it was great. It was a wonderful presentation. So you want to be careful about pacing yourself. Now, I will say this too. You don't want to talk fast all the time either, right? People can't keep up with you, etc. And your speed, that might be something else you might want to adjust as you go through. There might be times you want to talk slowly. There might be times you want to talk fast. And if you change your speed a little bit, that also will keep people involved. The next suggestion, really great suggestion in keeping people involved, watching your presentation, remembering what you have to say, is to involve your listeners. Get them engaged. Now, you might have a big audience. How do I get them engaged? Well, one of the ways is, hey, listen, today on the way to work, it was absolutely horrible. My car wouldn't start. How many of you in the audience, maybe you have any problems getting your car started today? Raise your hand. A couple are going to raise their hand. So you can do some things on occasion. Get people to raise their hands or do something. Or in a smaller group, you can call on people. Notice in classes that I have how whether you raise your hand or not, I oftentimes call on you. Well, what do you think about this? How would you do that, etc.? If you get people engaged, they're now spending more time watching what you're doing. It's like, oh my God, he's going to call on me, etc. Or, hey, this is cool, I'm involved, etc. So another thing you want to do is try to involve your listeners with regard to it. Next suggestion given by your book. Try to use some humor. Try to use some humor. Now, I'm not saying you should be a stand-up comedian up there, but a little joke here, there, or the other, and that doesn't hurt. The only thing I'm going to warn you about is oftentimes with regard to humor, it's too easy to offend somebody. You make a joke about something and all of a sudden someone takes it in offense. One of the suggestions I've heard, and it kind of works to a certain degree, is make fun of yourself. Or something about you. I had to make a presentation at Smeal, the Smeal College of Business, before other faculty members. I won an award and they wanted me to talk about what was I doing. And when I got there, one of the things I did as a little bit of a humor is I was telling, listen, today was an interesting day for me. Before I was able to get here, I was delayed, and I apologize. I was a couple minutes late getting here. I would have liked to be here before my presentation to meet you folks. Unfortunately, I arrived just about the time I had to present. I said, but I live at home with my son, and we have two cars in a garage or whatever. And this morning, as he was leaving the house in his car, his Jeep, he backed up into the garage door. He had hit the button to open it up, but didn't watch to see if it opened up or not. Just made the assumption. Started his car up, put it in reverse, and went right into our garage door. And the way I was able to phrase it, etc., a lot of people were laughing. I made some comments about stupid driving and other things like that. That type of humor is okay. It didn't offend anybody, even my son who was not there. But I told him my son thought it was kind of funny too. Sometimes make fun about yourself or some people but be careful. Again, sense of humor is great, but also be careful not to offend somebody. It's so easy to offend somebody. Another suggestion I have with regard to making your presentation memorable is to be yourself. Don't be a phony. People oftentimes can see right through others when you're phony, when you're not yourself. So be careful. You want to be genuine. I mean, I'm telling you to do all these different things, which obviously I wouldn't have done it that way. But nonetheless, you yourself, be yourself. Don't be phony. Another suggestion, really good suggestion that we have here, is what you want to do is you want to start your presentation with attention getters. Attention getters. Go in there and start off by a quotation. Hey, listen, the definition of a fool is someone who does the same thing over and over again and expects a different result. Start off with some sort of quotation like that. Might start off with a definition. Well, okay, definition of fool, etc. Might a story. Hey, before I came here, my son backed into, etc. A startling statement. Did you know that, uh, you know, uh, 90% of the people in this room are going to, bump their head against a wall, before the end of the day or something like that. An unusual fact, that also will get someone's attention. Start off with a question. Hey, with regard to this, how many of you did this or how many of you did that, etc.? What do you think? Start off with a question. And also, when you do this, it's not bad to bring props and visuals. People, again, remember visuals. You oftentimes will have a presentation, but sometimes bring props with you as well, etc., as you're presenting. And some people make a presentation on Walmart one time, and one of the things they did is they went out and they all bought vests that looked like the Walmart vest when you walk into a store or whatever to make the presentation. I had somebody do a couple of students make a presentation. I think it was on Southwest Air. So they went into a dollar store and they bought little kids' play toys of captain's caps or whatever that they have. So visuals like that can be helpful. Another couple of thoughts for you, and then we'll end up concluding for this. Again, as I mentioned to you before, you should have an opening. Please don't start off without an opening. You want to introduce yourself, introduce your topic. If you have others presenting with you, introduce them, etc. There should be the introduction. There should be a greeting, hi everybody, etc. A greeting, welcome everybody to, etc. And also in that introduction, you should give people a roadmap. Give them an agenda. This is what we're going to cover. Bob's going to talk about this, and Sally's going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this, etc. Give people that roadmap. Related to that, have that closing. Have that closing. And keep in mind it should be that wrap-up, summarizing type of closing. Not just, okay, thanks a lot, any questions, see you later. Because you give a presentation, say, any questions, see you later, guess what? Nobody has any questions. You think you did a horrible job. So one of the things, ask them for questions, that's fine. But do a wrap-up closing, a summarizing. Go over, the important points. Show the meaning of this for them and for you, etc. What's in it for you, etc. And make sure that you thank your audience in it. And another important point about the closing, have your contact information. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people give a closing, etc., and they don't give their contact information. So what do I got to do at the end if I got to run up through 100 people and say, hey, you got a business card? Can I contact, etc.? Have your contact information. Also, another suggestion for you, as we talked about earlier, you want to have transitions between speakers. I call them segues. Oh, and now that I'm done, I'm going to have Bob talk. Bob's our vice president of sales or something. Bob's going to talk to you about X or whatever. And then when Bob is done, oh, now I'm going to have Sally, who's the executive vice president of marketing. She's going to talk. Have these transitions, and not only the pass off, but when I passed it off to Bob, Bob should say, hey, Neil, thanks so much. I appreciate your, what you said about, topic A. Now I'm going to talk about topic B. There should be, greet the audience, thank the prior speaker type of thing that we have with regard to it. The next thing I'm going to mention, the final thing about presentations, is be careful about PowerPoints. You should have PowerPoints to enhance your presentation, not be your presentation. I've had students come to me and say, oh, I was in someone's class or whatever. They just put everything on their PowerPoint. They could have just hit, slideshow, and they could have left. I don't need to have them there. So your PowerPoint should have lots of visuals on it, very few words, etc. They should enhance and not be your presentation. And the visuals, by the way, are very important that you have. Again, people remember visuals. The only other thing I want to mention here, that finishes up presentations. I just want to mention two other things. Think about this. The next topic I have is leaving a telephone message, right? You've all left messages. You say, why are you telling me how to leave a message? I've been doing this since I was, 3 years old or something like that, and I called grandma or whatever and left a message. Yeah, you probably have. Let me make this suggestion. Most of us, when we leave a phone message on voicemail, whether it's someone's cell phone, whether it's their home answer machine, if anybody still has any of those, or whether it's at work or whatever, most of us do the following. Let's say I'm calling you and I want to talk about class tomorrow. Oh hi, Pat, whether it's Patrick or Patricia. Hi Pat, this is Neil calling. With regard to our class tomorrow, what I'd like you to do is like you to be prepared to talk about this, that, and the other, etc. And make sure you do this, that, 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 that. So my message oftentimes is, kind of lengthy, even a minute's lengthy, right? And I've had people leave messages that are several minutes long. And then at the end of it, we say, oh, thanks a lot. Oh, and by the way, my phone number is 1234567, etc. Click. Think about this. If someone listens to that, they don't know you, right? You've called them and they do want to call you back. They listen to this long phone message, and at the end you say your phone number. And usually because you know your phone number, you say it quickly, so quickly they can't pick it up. So what do they have to do to get your phone number? They have to listen to your long message again. And sometimes when they do it again, they still can't get all the numbers, and they might have to listen to it again. Now, I know we have caller ID and other things like that. Oh, you should have it, etc. Don't make the people you contact work. My suggestion is this. When you call somebody and you leave a message on voicemail, not only should you leave your phone number at the end, but leave it at the beginning. Oh, hi, Pat. This is Neil Fogarty calling from Smeal College of Business. My telephone number is 123-4567. Again, my number is 123-4567. Wanted to talk to you about da-da-da-da. Then I leave the message at the very end. Pat, thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow in class. Again, my phone number is 123-4567. It might even say it again, 123-4567. Now, if they missed it through, you said it now 4 times, if they have to listen to your message again, they don't have to listen to the very beginning of your message. They don't have to listen to the whole thing. The last suggestion I have goes to emails. We send emails a million times, and whereas most of you are much more comfortable sending texts, again, a business, email is the way to go. And one of the things I'm going to suggest to you is use your subject line. A lot of people in the subject line, subject line is meeting today or whatever. Let's say the meeting today is canceled. So what you do is you write meeting today, and then you go and you write your note, etc. Well, a lot of people, when they get an email, unlike a text that comes across their phone right in front, they see the whole thing or whatever. An email, oftentimes all they see is just the name of who sent it, maybe the time, and also what the subject is. So I look at this and I'm driving and it says, oh, meeting today, but it doesn't tell me anything. Now as I'm driving, I got to open it up, I got to read the email, drive off the road and have an accident. My suggestion to you is mention in the subject line any key parts of the email. Meeting today canceled. Meeting today moved to room 104, etc. If you put that right there, then as they look at it, they'll know that. They can check it later, but they know right away, oh, it's canceled, I can go home. Oh, it's an hour later. Oh, it's going to be in room whatever. That helps. So I would highly recommend that you do that. Be careful with regard to emails about another issue. Sending an email to which you wanted to put an attachment, but forgetting to do that. I've sent those oops emails. I send somebody with a letter, oh, and attached to something, and then I send it. It's like, oh, damn, and I got to write them, immediately back. Oops, meant to attach this. A way to get past the oops email is if you're sending someone an email with an attachment, attach the attachment first and then write the email. Attach the attachment first and write the email. We focus so extensively on the subject matter of the email, of the wording of the email, that by the time we're done writing that email, we forgot to put the attachment on. So if you put the attachment on before you write it, you're going to be in great shape. So that finishes up what I wanted to talk to you about communications. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I hope in somewhere in this epistle of things that I've told you, I said something that made sense that could help you to improve your presentations, to help make your content more memorable. If you have any questions, certainly let me know, and I'll see you in our next class.